Welcome back. State of the Union. President Biden delivered his second State of the Union address on Tuesday, and it was something. From heckling to firing back, we'll take a look at the biggest moments from the evening, the notable policy discussions in the president's speech, and how it factors into 2024. Then, we'll take a look at the Republican rebuttal delivered by Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders. We'll be talking about those stories and more. Today, February 10th, 2023. From Ishan Media, this is the Ishan S. Show, a podcast about the interesting and ever-changing world of American politics. With me, your host, Ishan. Thanks for joining us at the Ishan S. Show today. The State of the Union address is an age-old tradition in American politics where the President of the United States delivers his assessment of the country and recommendations for the coming year. It's an exciting time in Washington for members of Congress and others involved in politics and political nerds across the country like me. In more formal terms, the Constitution says that the President, quote, shall from time to time to give to the Congress information of the State of the Union and recommend to their consideration such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient. President Biden delivered his second State of the Union address on Tuesday, so this was set up to be more of an interesting address in many ways, mainly because this was Biden's biggest audience that he has had since the midterms last November. And it's probably going to be the largest audience that he'll have until next year's State of the Union address. You see, 20 to 30 million American households tune in to watch this address, and that's a lot of people. I mean, most things that you see on TV do not hit 20 to 30 million viewers. So getting a speech of 20 to 30 million households with so many people within those households, it's a large number of people that are going to be viewing this address. And so in many ways, President Biden is kind of lucky to have access to such a large audience every year. Maybe this show could reach one of those types of numbers one day. But it's also interesting because this was Biden's first address to a divided Congress. Now, if you've been living under a rock or you haven't been listening to this show, which is practically the same thing at this point, Republicans won control of the U.S. House of Representatives in November, which means that anything successful that happens in D.C. over the next 2 years will be through Democrats and Republicans working together. It was pretty evident with their leader, Speaker McCarthy, sitting right behind the president and next to VP Kamala Harris on the House rostrum. So this was, I think, the first big test for Biden, because now it's no longer the Democratic trifecta when they controlled the House, the Senate, and the presidency. Now they've lost one of those keys to power, and Republicans can now be a big thorn in Biden's side, and Democrats in general, and can flop, or they might be able to kind of permit Biden's agenda for the next 2 years. So anyway, there was a lot of interest behind Biden's State of the Union address, and many say that this State of the Union address was kind of the unofficial start of the 2024 presidential campaign. With Biden as the incumbent, how he would handle this speech and how he would speak to the American people was going to be very important in determining his outlooks for the next campaign. Because look, he is going to, in this speech, the president outlines his priorities, what he wants, or he or she wants to be dealt with in the next 2 years, or in the next year by the Congress. It's setting up this agenda. But uniquely, with this State of the Union address, and that's usually what happens in most State of the Union addresses in the year before an election year, the president will deliver their agenda, and that will kind of set the stage of what the president wants to do and how they want to kind of set up their reelection campaign. It's an interesting thing to study because what they say in this address is going to be, these talking points are going to be repeated and parroted for the next 18 months. And I know that half the things that Biden has said in the State of the Union address are going to be in our minds until November 5th, 2024. And some of these issues are going to go away but then come back up. So there's a lot. And so buckle into your seats because we're on the 2024 train. So the night started with President Biden greeting a long line of representatives with his escort committee, which is nothing weird. It is just members of the congressional leadership who followed behind him. And he started his speech, and he began his speech by actually congratulating House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell.
I start tonight by congratulating the 118th Congress and the new Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. Speaker, I don't want to ruin your reputation, but I look forward to working with you. Congratulations to the longest-serving leader in the history of the United States Senate, Mitch McConnell. Where are you, Mitch?
So that's not terribly common. It's nothing, extraordinary. Oh my God, he shook Kevin McCarthy's hand. No, it's nothing that's not a big deal that he did that. But I mean, it brought this old Washington that many of us haven't seen in 6 years. And we haven't seen it due to the constant dysfunction of politics. And it was nice. It was nice to see a president of one party congratulating the speaker of another for winning the speakership and saying, hey, let's work together on this. Let's run this country together because we've both been given a mandate and we are now going to follow with that mandate and we are going to govern this country for the American people. So it felt nice to see at least some sense of cooperation. Maybe it was fake, I don't know. But it was nice to at least see something like that. But anyway, moving on. Biden began the speech by touting his administration's achievement in improving the cost of living standards in this country. Now, obviously, we are not anywhere at where we were a couple of years ago. Inflation over these past 2 years has been pushing up our prices. We are still struggling to, as a nation, keep up with the costs, and we are on the cusp of a recession. However, with that being said, it is notable that we are, in fact, decreasing that in a notable amount. So we're no longer at the 9% inflation that we saw just last year. The Biden administration has managed to bring that inflation down to 6.5%. And beyond that, gas prices are also lower. And the interest rates that the Fed has been hiking have kind of plateaued now. It's not these big jumps anymore. Now interest rates are starting to plateau, and maybe we might even start to see them lower. But for Biden, of course, he's only going to talk about that second part where all the good stuff is happening. It's not going to be like, any of the bad stuff. He mentioned that his bipartisan CHIPS Act that he managed to pass and his infrastructure package both were monumental for his administration and were allowing for this. I think for someone like Biden, legislative achievement has not been a measurable success because, number one, of how difficult it was to even get legislation passed. Because, again, remember, even without this divided Congress, when Democrats still controlled the federal government, it was a 50-50 Senate with two very difficult Democrats, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, one of whom is not even a Democrat anymore, and then a extremely divided House. It was the same margin for Democrats. It was just Democrats in the majority last year. So getting Biden's agenda through was very difficult. And so legislative achievement was not something that Biden could go around bragging about. But then the other part is also how long this successful legislation would take to go into effect. It's a bit of a task since some of the dates that the administration is putting on these projects sit at 2, 5, and 10 years in the future. So being able to show a measurable substantive result of this legislation was already known to be the challenge for Biden. But nonetheless, he promoted these two pieces of legislation and the jobs that they have created. I think it was a smart play, mainly because of the fact that these jobs that he's bringing are going to the Rust Belt, which is mainly the dead industrial Midwest. And if you've listened to this show, you'll know that the Midwest is very important in any presidential election because of the fact that these are the closest states in the union. They are the ones that decide these races. And so in the Midwest, the states you particularly want to look at are Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Here, these states are what decide presidential elections. And, Biden won the presidency off of these states and Arizona and Georgia in addition to that. But bringing jobs back might actually help Democrats because Democrats have been losing a bit of their foothold in the Midwest. So if Biden tries to bring back these jobs where he was saying that you could make $120,000 from a job like this without a college degree, which in the 21st century is a big deal, he might be trying to strategically set his party up for success in the Midwest and try to push ahead. And we're seeing some of the fruits of that returns. I think it was just recently in the last few days, the Pennsylvania House of Representatives just flipped to Democrats, and Governor Gretchen Whitmer, a Democrat in Michigan, now has a Democratic trifecta in the Michigan government. So it's paying off. And I think with these types of economic benefits, it's going to be even more because in this region specifically of the country, those types of policies matter a lot. And I think in terms of the economy, Biden has made his communications team proud. But the conversation after that shifted to oil and energy, everyone's favorite topics. Biden was very proud of his administration's efforts to increase renewable energy production because climate change is still at the top of minds for many Democrats. But there was also a very funny moment when Biden wanted to seem like he was still for oil, but awkwardly says that, and I'm paraphrasing, we'll need oil for at least a decade. It seemed a little out of touch and arrogant to be like, we'll still need oil for a few more years. Don't worry. We'll keep using oil. But after he said that, it was followed by the entire Republican side, including Kevin McCarthy sitting behind him, laughing. Take a listen to that.
They were afraid you're going to shut down all the oil wells and all the oil refineries anyway, so why should we invest in them? I said, we're going to need oil for at least another decade, and that's going to exceed and beyond that. We're going to need it.
Then, one of the more notable moments from the evening was when Biden discussed the debt ceiling. Pause. The debt ceiling is basically the U.S. government effectively setting a credit limit for itself. It's how much you can spend, how much you can borrow to spend, and without having to pay back loans. And you can't spend more than that. Now, the current debt ceiling is at a modest $31.4 trillion, and it needs to be raised every year so that the U.S. government doesn't default on its loans. Now, us defaulting on these loans would be catastrophic for the global economy, and that was really evident when Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen in a letter to Congress warned of the impending debt limit and said that Congress has until June to figure something out or else bad things would happen. So the debt ceiling is an incredibly big issue, but with Republicans now in control of the House with different spending priorities and very critical of Biden's agenda, it's an even bigger crisis in waiting because there are some Republicans who have not explicitly said that they were willing to hold the debt ceiling issue hostage in an effort for political gain, but definitely didn't deny that they were thinking about it. And so it'd be a big issue for us to have to contend with if that were to happen. So Biden goes like, we got to work together. But in a really interesting move, he started saying that he was happy to work with the Republicans, but he wanted to make sure that all members of Congress stood for seniors. What? Initially, I thought, why would he bring up seniors? Obviously, seniors are important, but it didn't make sense for him to bring him up in the middle of debt ceiling stuff. He's like, stand up if you support seniors, if you stand with seniors. And obviously all of them stood up, because what member of Congress doesn't want to stand for seniors? They'd never win if they didn't. But then it made a little more sense why he did that. So after that, he says, and I'm paraphrasing, okay, so you all stand with seniors, which means that you guys would never vote against Social Security or Medicare. You couldn't. But then went on to say that certain Republican members of Congress, he didn't say any names, we'll say some names, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Rick Scott, among others, were ready to put Social Security and Medicare on the chopping block. Now, many Republican members of Congress were outraged by this. They couldn't believe such an accusation and began booing and calling President Biden a liar. This was definitely the most interesting moment of the night, without a doubt. I remember at least thinking to myself, what the heck is happening here? Like, is this politics now? Because I remember I was watching something on CNN just a few days ago, or Fox News, one of the two, and there was a member of Congress, a retired member of Congress, who says, if anybody were to do anything like that in Congress 10 years ago, they would be shamed and they would have been embarrassed. Now, it's everyone let loose. Kevin McCarthy in the back was spending his entire time trying to tell his members of his caucus to shut up, but many of them weren't listening, and discipline was not a theme at the address on Tuesday. And I guess it just represented how crazy things can get in Washington. Take a listen to that whole exchange.
So tonight I'm asking the Congress to follow suit. Let's commit here tonight to the full faith and credit of the United States of America will never, ever be questioned. Some of my Republican friends want to take the economy hostage. I get it, unless I agree to their economic plans. All of you at home should know what those plans are. Instead of making the wealthy pay their fair share, some Republicans want Medicare and Social Security to sunset. I'm not saying it's a majority. Let me give you, anybody who doubts it, contact my office. I'll give you a copy of the proposal. That means Congress doesn't vote. Well, I'm glad to see you. No, I tell you, I enjoy conversion. You know, it means if Congress doesn't keep the programs the way they are, they'd go away. Other Republicans say, I'm not saying it's a majority of you. I don't even think it's even a significant, but it's being proposed by individuals. I'm not politely not naming them, but it's being proposed by some of you. Look, folks, the idea is that we're not going to be moved into being threatened to default on the debt if we don't respond. Folks, as we all apparently agree, Social Security and Medicare is off the books now, right? They're not to be spent. All right. I'm ready. We got unanimity. So tonight, let's all agree, and we apparently are, let's stand up for seniors. Stand up and show them. We will not cut Social Security. We will not cut Medicare. Those benefits belong to the American people. They earned it. And if anyone tries to cut Social Security, which apparently no one's going to do, and if anyone tries to cut Medicare, I'll stop them. I'll veto it. And look, I'm not going to allow them to be taken away. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. But apparently it's not going to be a problem.
So that's called dysfunctional politics, or in 2023, just politics. Personally, I think Biden was very smart about this move. He effectively baited Republicans in Congress by saying that they wanted to cut Social Security and Medicare, and there are a few of them who do, But their apparent disgust with the notion of something like this is something that President Biden can use against them in time for debt limit talks. Well, you said that you don't plan on cutting Social Security or Medicare. You promised. If Republicans actually, in an effort to cause chaos for the debt ceiling stuff, if they actually try to cut Social Security and Medicare, after this moment of basically a lack of restraint, they are going to look very stupid. And I am being as candid as I can about that. It would be incredibly stupid of them if they were to suddenly change their mind and say we don't stand for Social Security and Medicare, because they were so outraged when Biden mentioned it. And I'm not taking sides here, but when you're looking at the politics of it, you can't do that. You can't seem this outraged by the notion of something like that, because they even said it initially. We want to look at cutting Social Security. But then when Biden called them out, many of them were outraged. And when I say they, I mean a very specific group of Republicans, a very tiny group of 20 or so. They were outraged. Marjorie Taylor Greene was shouting liar, going against decorum in general. But, whatever. They've backed themselves into a corner. We'll see how that plays. Now, there wasn't a lot more that happened that was notable from the evening. Biden talked about abortion rights, immigration, and the southern border crisis, the war in Ukraine, China, especially important after that balloon controversy recovered, which he didn't talk much about that. He said we shot down a balloon, and then Biden just went on to say that we have to compete with China. Very standard. He could have definitely done more about China. He could have talked more about China. He honestly, he should have talked more about China, because, and this is just coming from me as a concerned citizen, they had a balloon flying in our airspace, which the Department of Defense keeps releasing even more concerning information every day. They had an antenna on. They were collecting information. This isn't just us. This isn't even the first time. They release new information. I feel like it would have been very nice to hear from the commander-in-chief what his views were on this and what the administration was doing to stop China. Because, look, China's not a friend, and especially after this incident, Biden had to have taken a stronger stance on China, but he didn't. And then he also then went on to talk about protecting democracy. All right, so that was what happened at the State of the Union address. When we come back, we'll take a look at the reaction to it, the political impact of it, and the Republican response. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this short break. Thanks for coming back. So before we left, we talked about what happened at this year's State of the Union address. Now let's talk about the Republican response. So I've said it a billion times on this show. Delivering the official party response to a president's State of the Union address is a very prestigious role. I mean, think about it. Your party has deemed you as the right person, as the right face to put on the television screens of 20 to 30 million Americans to rebut the president of the United States. It's a distinct honor, and 4 of these people that have delivered this rebuttal have actually gone on to become president. I can't name those people off the top of my head for you, but I know Bill Clinton and Gerald Ford are 2 of them. But it's a very prestigious role, and it shows that you're a rising star and a notable person in your party. If you want some examples of who's delivered this before, Nikki Haley, who we've talked about a lot on this show, Tim Scott, Gretchen Whitmer, Stacey Abrams, Marco Rubio. I'm trying to remember who else has done it. There's a lot of people that have delivered this address before. Oh, Joe Biden himself has done it. What am I saying? There you go, 3 of the 4 presidents. Joe Biden himself has done it. So it's a pretty prestigious role to take on, because you are seen as the right face for rebutting the president. Now, of course, it can also go wrong. A lot more of these rebuttals are remembered for going wrong than for being amazing, because if you ask me right now, I can't remember a single thing from any of these rebuttals, but I do remember the people. And of the moments that I do remember Marco Rubio awkwardly asking or drinking water for 10 seconds in the middle of his address. That was a funny moment. But, I don't remember much. And that's generally the theme of this type of address. You don't remember much of what they say, but you remember kind of the gist of it. You remember who they were. So this year, the lucky individual to deliver the Republican response was Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders of the state of Arkansas. Now, Sarah Sanders is an interesting person. She is the daughter of former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee, who is very prominent in Republican circles. He's ran for president a few times. But Sarah Sanders worked on his campaign and then worked around in other campaigns and then ended up joining Team Trump. And on Team Trump, she served in a wide variety of capacities during the campaign, and it was actually then his press secretary. And for those of you who don't know what a press secretary is, they're basically the person that manages press and communications for the president. So she was his press secretary for a good while. I think she was actually his longest serving press secretary, and Trump had 4 of them. So she made her name very prominent, and she faced a lot of controversy. She was very fiery in conservative circles. So, pretty recognizable name. She ran for governor of Arkansas and ended up winning. No surprise in the fact that she won in the general election. I mean, everybody knows that you will win as a Republican in Arkansas. It was the primary that she won, and even that she didn't lose by too much. And I was just reading a Politico article where it said that she leapfrogged people that had been working for years for a run for governor. She leapfrogged past everybody. So she has had an incredibly impressive rise to prominence. So it's notable who this lady is. So good for her. But she has, in just a few days since she's become governor last month, has passed all sorts of interesting policies, including banning the term Latinx, banning critical race theory, and among other things. So she was a nice pick for the Republicans. And even smarter about this is that she is the first female governor of Arkansas. She is the youngest governor in the entire country. She is 40 years old. And I think that was very intentional because they wanted to juxtapose that to Biden being the oldest president in U.S. history. And I think there's a point in her speech where Sarah Sanders says, she's the first woman governor of the state of Arkansas, and she is the youngest governor in the country, while Biden is the oldest president in U.S. history. I don't know. I like that line a little. It was funny. But she basically touted every one of the Republicans' talking points. She went after Biden on foreign policy, criticized him for not talking about it enough, and that's a rightful criticism that I think could be included there. She went after him for social policies, talked about how Republicans are now in search of new leadership. It's time for new leadership in the Republican Party. She talked about her education plan that she just introduced today, saying that Democrats don't know how to run things. She criticized weak politicians. She went after the southern border crisis. She said that every state is now a border state because of Joe Biden. She basically parroted much of the Republicans' talking points, national Republicans' talking points, and did them pretty well. I think she made the impact she needed to make. But yeah, so here are some moments from Sarah Sanders' speech.
President Biden and I don't have a lot in common. I'm for freedom. He's for government control. At 40, I'm the youngest governor in the country. And at 80, he's the oldest president in American history. I'm the first woman to lead my state. And he's the first man to surrender his presidency to a woke mob that can't even tell you what a woman is. In the radical left's America, Washington taxes you and lights your hard-earned money on fire. But you get crushed with high gas prices, empty grocery shelves, and our children are taught to hate one another on account of their race, but not to love one another or our great country because we are free. But today, our freedom is under attack, and the America we love is in danger. President Biden and the Democrats have failed you, and it's time for a change. A new generation of Republican leaders are stepping up, not to be caretakers of the status quo, but to be change makers for the American people. We know not what the future holds, but we know who holds the future in his hands. And with God as our witness, we will show the world that America is still the place where freedom reigns and liberty will never die. Thank you. God bless you, and God bless America.
So yeah, that was Sarah Sanders' speech. Notable person. I would say you watch out for her because she's actually at the top of rumored running mate list for Trump. And, you know, it'd be nice to maybe reunite former president, former press secretary together on the same ticket. I don't know. I'm not speculating, though, about that right now. Back to Biden. So in general, what are my thoughts on the State of the Union address? I think Biden did a good job. It was definitely, of the three addresses that he's delivered to a joint session of Congress, mind you that last year was a State of the Union address, but his first one was just as an address to a joint session of Congress because you don't have a State of the Union address in your first year as president. Anyway, of the three addresses he's given since becoming president, I think this is definitely the best that he's delivered. He, number one, showed all his policies coming to fruition. Some of the policies coming to fruition because now he has something to measure. And he passed major pieces of legislation after last year's address, which have now, and many of them didn't take into effect immediately last year. So now that these policies are starting to come into effect, he can now tout those benefits at this address. And I think he's done a great job of that. He managed to point out where his priorities lie. He's coming in with a better mandate. Previous Democratic presidents that have come in like this, so that's Barack Obama and Bill Clinton before him, they came in after brutal midterms. And so when you come back from a brutal midterm, you're not able to show your face to people. You cannot ask for anything big. You cannot suggest anything crazy. But Biden, on the other hand, came in losing 9 seats. And he still lost seats, but by golly, Miss Molly, that's nothing. And that's actually impressive that he managed to only lose 9 seats and keep everything else. He came in with a mandate, and he was not shying away from asking for what he wanted and making these requests for all his spending. So he played it smart by coming across as assertive. And I think the other interesting point was that Republicans' dysfunction in general was funny because and there was Republican dysfunction. Do not deny it. It was. Kevin McCarthy was trying to tell his people to shut up every moment. So when Biden clapped back at them, they were booing, and he said, okay, here's the receipt. You better not be cutting Social Security or Medicare. You better not be coming after other policies. I'm going to take your word on that. I think he effectively sent his message that this is how he wants to govern. He's ready to sit with Republicans, and he is ready to work with them, but only if they're ready to work in good faith. I think that shows in the numbers as well, because according to a CNN flash poll immediately after the address, 72% approval. You gotta see. 72% is not bad at all. And actually, I was surprised to see 72% because I thought it'd be like 50 or 60. 72% is a pretty big number for a State of the Union address reaction. That means 72% of viewers were like, okay, I'm on board with Biden. That's something he needs. And especially now that he wants to kickstart his 2024 campaign, this State of the Union address was supposed to be kind of what set things in motion for that announcement. And because of the classified document scandal, they were kind of thinking of not doing it. But after this address, I'd say go ahead. You've definitely established yourself as, you know, your priorities for policy, your goals, what you want to do. I would say that this is honestly the best time to do it. He has done well. I'd say Biden gets a good B+. As for Republicans and the Republican rebuttal, I think Sarah Sanders was the best pick for this year's rebuttal. No doubt about it. She successfully managed to juxtapose herself to Biden, and she, by saying, she's a woman, that she's the youngest governor, she is beyond that, all these things that she was able to defer herself from Biden. And then she took that and applied that to new Republican leadership. She said, I am the representation of the next generation of Republican leadership. This is what our party is. That was effective messaging. And I think she scored points there for her party. Although what they discussed, it was mainly talking points that you always hear from Republicans, and good on them for sticking to their points, I guess. But I feel like it was just missing something because it was, again, not notable. And I know I said that these responses are generally not notable, but I'm always looking for something nice. We're always looking for something interesting. So I feel like Sarah Sanders could have pushed it a little more, but still gets satisfactory points. I think they did well. So B+ for her, I guess, as well. So in general, this has been a B+ State of the Union address. And I'd say that's good enough for me. And I would look forward to seeing how this impacts presidential politics, because we are now entering 2024, because that's the State of the Union kicking things off. And I am really excited for it. And because in just 4 months, I guess, we are going to be talking about presidential debates. We're going to be talking about polling. We're going to be talking about candidates. This State of the Union address is what kicks that off. All right, that is all the time that we have today. Thank you so much for joining us. We are going to see you next week. Stay tuned. Take care. Have a nice week ahead. And so that does it for us here today at the Ishan S. Show. If you liked my commentary, then go ahead and follow at Ishan S. Show on Twitter and at the Ishan S. Show on Instagram for breaking news posts and updates about the show. If you want to learn more about political stories, then check out my political news blog on the IshanSshow.com and enter in your email to subscribe, and just check out the IshanSshow.com. And do us a favor and share this episode and all other Ishan S. Show content with your friends and family. It is the best way for this show to grow and get more people listening to it, and it helps out so much. Thanks again for all your support, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye.